Great to see so many smiling faces this morning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where is the president's face?
You really want to see that one?
Yes, there he is. We called you that. We called you the. You're going to be known as. You're going to go down as the Zoom president.
I tell you, I had no idea what I signed up for this year, brother.
But you've done one terrific job, Lewis.
Well, thanks, Betsy. It's been interesting, but you know what? We're working together and pulling this thing together and pulling some pieces together to make it happen. And we haven't finished. We've got some really good things in the works that I'm hoping will be great as we move forward, not only this year, but moving toward the future. So.
I don't remember. I remember your inaugural speech, which is very good. I don't remember you saying anything about Zooming through the year.
Yeah, I didn't, and I didn't say anything about Zoom fatigue either. So when you do 3 or 4 of these a day, it kind of,
Right.
on you a little bit.
Right.
I think everyone is frankly ready for a little more social contact as opposed to virtual contact.
Because shock of shocks, this is a social people touch hug business, right?
Amen. Amen. Dr. Walden, great to see you again. I think the last time I remember having you speak at our association was when I was chair of our government affairs committee. That's been several years ago. I think you've been there since at one point with maybe TCC, but it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Lois. Thank you.
Whenever you're ready, Lewis, we'll keep letting people in from the waiting room and go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, my computer is doing funny things on me right this minute. It just switched off to, there we go. Let's try it again. Okay, looks like we may be back. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Power Hour. I am Lewis Grubbs, president of our Raleigh Regional Association of Realtors for 2020. An exciting year it has been. Our Power Hour series features curated classes at 10 a.m. It's also a great way to connect with industry experts and a place to cultivate professional development skills. Registration is live on rrar.com for the remaining modules. Thank you to our series sponsor, Ed Robertson with Home Team Inspection Service. Ed, take a couple minutes to tell us about yourself and your company.
Thank you, Lewis. Good morning, everyone. I am Ed Robertson. It's good to be back with you again this week. At Home Team Inspection Service, we provide a wide array of inspection services and ancillary services in the home inspection realm. It's everything pre-purchase, pre-listing, new construction. We've got a depth of experience with very old homes. In the new construction realm, we provide pre-drywall inspections and, of course, the pre-closing and warranty inspections. We also perform commercial property inspections if you have a need in that realm. On the ancillary services, we've got a wide range, including the wood destroying insect inspections, radon testing, well and septic and water analysis testing. We have the sewer line camera for sewer mains in residences where you've got really old or sketchy looking setup with trees and roots, that sort of thing. We also do swimming pool inspections, mold and indoor air quality. We can bring an HVAC tech for a full-blown diagnostic there. We've also got relationship with chimney inspectors, so we can pretty much provide every service that you would need. In the realm of technology, what we work to do is making everything easier for the agent and the client. 24/7 online scheduling, contract e-sign, online payment. We can take cards on site, just super easy. Report delivery is rapid with a web link. We are TMLS Live Box subscribers, of course. We've got confirmation and reminders for agents and clients. We've got a technology called Repair Request List that enables an agent to build a DDRA specific report, pulling just the photos and remarks that they're interested in addressing. We'd be happy to demonstrate that anytime for agents or for a group in a agency. We've got customer service 8 to 5 weekdays. We do reviews on site with the clients and the agents, or in this environment, we can do Zoom reviews also. We're always available for follow-up questions. And I also teach several classes for agents on home inspection topics, including the home inspection and HVAC systems and radon gas. So if that's something you'd be interested in for your group, be happy to also either do that live or do it via Zoom. So Ed Robertson, Home Team Inspection Service. We just try to make everything easy for you guys. Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you, Ed, and thank everyone for joining us today for our economic and housing update with Stacey Anfindsen and Dr. Michael Walden. Stacey Anfindsen is a 1983 graduate of Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. He is a state-certified residential real estate appraiser and licensed residential broker. He was the 2012 president of the Raleigh Regional Association of Realtors and a past director for TMLS. Dr. Michael Walden is a William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at North Carolina State University, and a member of the graduate economics faculty with the Poole College of Management. His PhD degree is from Cornell University, and he has been at NC State since 1978. He has also been a visiting professor at Duke University. Walden has published 12 books and over 300 articles and reports, including his newest book, North Carolina Beyond the Connected Age, the Tar Heel State in 2050. Walden can be frequently seen, heard, and read in the media. He has daily radio programs aired on stations around North Carolina. His biweekly column, You Decide, is carried by over 40 newspapers in the state. He has made close to 3,000 personal presentations. Walden has won numerous academic and public awards, including 2 Champion Tuck Awards for excellence in broadcasting, the UNC Board of Governors Award for excellence in public service, the Order of the Longleaf Pine, and the Holiday Medal for Excellence from North Carolina State University. He has also served on several state and local commissions and currently is a member of the NC Future Investment Resources for Sustainable Transportation Commission. His newest book, Real Solutions, Common Sense Ideas for Solving Our Most Pressing Problems, will be published in 2020. Welcome, Stacey and Dr. Walden. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lewis, and thank you for inviting me and listening to an economist this early. I'm going to have help with the slides, so whomever's advancing my slides, I'll simply say next slide, and that's fine, next slide. Very good. I want to start with talking about what the economy was like prior to this coronavirus. We actually had a very good economy. We were growing at about a 2% rate in terms of what's called real GDP. That's simply aggregate production. That's not too cold, it's not too hot, not too cold. It's right in that Goldilocks area. We had wages rising. We had a 50-year low unemployment rate. And importantly, if you look at the major categories of our workforce, it was low for virtually every category. And we had low inflation on top of this. So we had a very, very good economy. Next slide. And then the next slide, please. Then the coronavirus paid us attention, paid us a visit, I should say. It's also, we're paying attention to it. And we have what I call a mandated recession now. In fact, the think tank that's charged with tracking and naming and calling recessions, National Bureau of Economic Research, has now said that we went into a recession in February. That simply means the economy is going back rather than forward. Falling sales, falling profits, falling employment, falling income, et cetera, the whole mess. This is different than any recession that I have been following, and I've been at this now for over 40 years. And indeed, looking back in economic history, we've never had a recession like this. Most recessions, or I should say all recessions prior to this one, are caused by some excess in the economy. Usually it's in the financial market, and a market that you closely follow, the housing market. Clearly the run-up in debt in the housing market, the speculation in housing prices, the leniency of lenders. I mean, this has all been documented, led to what we call the Great Recession, the last recession we've had prior to this one, 2007, 2009. We've had other recessions caused by overinvestment in technology, that's the 2000 recession, constraints in some inputs like oil, 2 recessions in the 70s were behind that. But this one is different in that we had a good economy going into this year, and yet because the virus appeared and because the health experts said this is a very fast moving, very contagious virus, we can quickly get hundreds of thousands of cases, we could potentially overwhelm our healthcare system. It was decided by most governors, I think by all governors, and the governors had charge of this, not the president in terms of shutting things down. It was decided by most governors that we had to restrict economic interaction, personal interaction, for at least a period of time. And we had stay-at-home orders here in North Carolina. We had many, many businesses, it's estimated maybe as many of a third of our businesses shut down by mandate. And we knew this would cause, obviously, economic turmoil, but the decision was that that economic turmoil, those economic losses, were worth taking in order to save lives and save the lives and the productivity of humans. So I call this, therefore, the mandated recession, because we actually made a decision, a voluntary decision through our various decision makers, public decision makers, to dramatically limit the economy and thereby ensure that we've gone into a recession. Next slide. Now, how bad is this recession? Well, we're beginning to get data. We've had unemployment data now. We saw that the unemployment rate in April went up to close to 15% here in North Carolina, a little higher nationally. We don't have GDP numbers for the second quarter, but we're thinking that that's going to be the biggest drop, probably cut in GDP of somewhere between 25 and 33%, which would put it that those kind of numbers we've not seen since the Great Depression of the 30s. The difference is going to be that we think, and of course this is almost a day-to-day thing, we think this is going to be short-lived. And in fact, I'll tell you some data that give us some hope in that regard. Next slide, please. We now have some data for North Carolina that show, and actually this should, this slide is showing you the big drops in employment by sector, at least some of the key sectors from February to April. Biggest loser, no surprise, hospitality and leisure. That's your hotels, that's your restaurants, that's your tourism. 50% of the jobs were cut in North Carolina. These are North Carolina numbers from February to April. Personal services, barbers, hair salons, nail salons, etc. Anything where you get a lot of personal interaction. 20% cut in jobs, manufacturing, 10% cut in jobs. We did have some sectors that escaped this rather unscathed. Financial services, government, obviously both essential services. Most of those sectors were kept open. Construction, also considered essential, only lost 6% of its jobs. Next slide. And we also have seen some difference by region. Asheville and Wilmington were the regions that were hardest hit. Makes sense. Those are big tourist areas. Burlington and Hickory, second, and all four of these were around 20% loss in employment from February to April. Burlington and Hickory, they have above average concentration of manufacturing. They're also on I-40. They got a lot of traffic off of I-40, and obviously traffic on I-40 slowed down. Very interestingly, the area of our state that had the smallest job losses, rural North Carolina. That is, those counties outside of metro areas. And I think that's because the virus didn't spread as much there because it's less dense. Therefore, we didn't have as many shutdown orders from local governments. More businesses were able to stay open. And of course, agriculture, which is big in North Carolina, was considered an essential service. So those offices were open. New Bern and Durham Chapel Hill also were on the lower side of the job losses. Next slide. Now we have had an economic rebound in both May and June. We got the national numbers a couple weeks ago. I think 5 million jobs were added. The unemployment rate went down to around 11%. We just this past Friday got the North Carolina numbers for June, and we had a big drop in our unemployment rate. We were around 12% in May, and we went down to, I think, 7.6% in June. And if you look at the sectors that got hardest hit, like hospitality, like personal services, those are the sectors that have actually seen a return. And of course, this is coincidental with the reopening that North Carolina has begun. We're now in I think the middle phase there. Now, the big question right now as we're sitting here on Monday morning, July 21st, the big question right now, actually July 20th, the big question right now is whether this will continue. And the reason we're questioning that is we're now seeing another outbreak. As you all know, the news is filled with this. Here in North Carolina, Florida, Texas, many states. Some states have actually rolled back their opening. California is one of those. We haven't done that in North Carolina, but we don't need the government to actually roll back their openings in order for economic activity to slow down. People will self-quarantine. People will say, hey, I'm hearing all these cases breaking out. I was planning to go to a restaurant. Now I'm not going to do that. And we actually have some preliminary numbers based on what's called mobility data, how much are people moving around, and people are not moving around as much in the last couple of weeks as they were in prior weeks. So I'm concerned, and I think a lot of economists concerned that the good news that we saw in May and June, it may continue into July, but not as robust as we saw in May and June. So we do have another big worry here with the rising outbreaks. How can we moderate that? How can we not overwhelm the healthcare system? And will the economy take a hit because of this? And my answer to the last is yes, I think it will. So we're certainly not out of the woods yet, and we're in another situation where we need to be worried. Next slide. Now, the area of the economy that a lot of you interact with has actually been one of the brighter sectors of the economy. Sales, construction, prices have all been reinforced since May. Of course, we now have, I believe, record low, historic low interest rates. I think 30-year fixed, Stacey keeps on this much more than I do, but I think the 30-year fixed mortgage rate is now under 3%, never been under 3% in our history. The housing market, I think, has also benefited from the federal financial support of households, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then I do think with people spending so much time at home, working or playing, a lot of people have reevaluated their dwellings, and apparently there is a lot of remodeling going on, a lot of construction going on. Lumber prices are now through the roof. So the housing sector has been, in some sense, a sector that's had, usually during recessions, housing gets clobbered. And not so much this time, and I think it's because, again, the unique nature of this recession. Next slide. Now, real quick, the federal government was very quick to intervene and try to prop up the economy. The big worry with the federal government is not only that households would be hurt, but also that businesses would go bankrupt right and left. And when we come out of this, we wouldn't effectively have an economy left. So the federal government is very fast in allocating trillions of dollars to financially supporting the economy. We had $3 trillion right off out of the bat in terms of the PPP, the stimulus checks, a whole array of other things. We had the federal government step up with adding $600 a week to any person's unemployment compensation check that they get from their state. Those do vary by state, but the 600 is across the board. And the Federal Reserve has also stepped up with lowering interest rates. They actually have a $4 trillion lending program out there too. And as we talk today, Congress is now back in session. There's a lot of anticipation as to whether another package will come out, multi-trillion-dollar package come out from the federal government. The House already did pass something that it was a no-go in the Senate, so it'll have to be something new. But a lot of people are saying we need another round of stimulus checks. In fact, the president has endorsed that. There's a question about, will the $600 addition in unemployment compensation, will that be re-upped, or will be something else? And then I think there's a lot of worry about state and local governments. Here in North Carolina, we're probably going to lose at least 10% of our revenues in this fiscal year. And state and locals don't have the same ability to borrow for day-to-day finances the federal does. So I think if we do get a new stimulus package, probably all of those bases will be covered. So be paying attention over the next couple of weeks. The unemployment, $600 a week, is up at the end of this month. So I think there's going to be a lot of push to get something passed and signed by the president before the end of the month. Next slide. Now, the long run, there is a cost to all this effort, financial effort. Every dollar that the federal government has allocated to fight the coronavirus and to help the economy is a borrowed dollar. So we're adding to the federal debt. My answer to that as an economist is, if ever there was a good time to borrow money and put this onus on future generations, it is for this because we want to have an economy left when we come out of this. So I would argue, and this is my personal view, that the borrowing is very justified in this case. Now, the Federal Reserve, when they do things in the economy like provide money to be loaned out, that's all created. Federal Reserve has that unique power to create money. And the traditional cost of that was that the Federal Reserve would cause inflation to rise. There's no sign of that right now. So I think the Federal Reserve will get a pass on that. But the big cost here is a rise in the national debt. Again, everyone will have to evaluate whether that was worth it or not. Next slide. And go on, next slide. I already covered this. Next slide. Now, usually we don't have this debate, balancing health and wealth. And what I mean by that, usually when our economy performs better, when our economy is wealthier, we have resources to put into the healthcare system. People are motivated to take care of themselves if they have a good economic future ahead of them. So usually health and wealth go hand in hand. In this case, they've not. They've been actually at loggerheads because in order to address the health issue that has contained the pandemic, we have had to contain the economy and obviously shrink wealth, shrink income. Now, a question arises, well, has it been worth it? Give me some numbers, Walden. Well, there's actually been some research by a variety of economists trying to estimate what are we gaining in our economy, our future economy, by saving lives, if we have saved lives, and I think most of the experts say we have, due to these containments, due to the mandated recession. And the number that has actually been estimated by more than one study is about $8 trillion. That if you estimate the number of people that would have died and what their productivity would have been as they continue to work if they hadn't died, due to not dealing anything about the coronavirus, we would have lost $8 trillion in future productivity. And so I think that's the number you want to compare against the cost of shutting down. When we had the broadest shutdowns, the economy was losing about 500 billion per month. That's a national number. So it is very odd, though, to have this conflict almost between health and wealth. Next slide. All right, where are we going to go? Well, I'm going to give you two slides here. These are based on, I looked at a lot of forecasts from a variety of sources, public sources like Congressional Budget Office, Federal Reserve, private sources like Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo. There's actually been a great deal of consistency in the forecast, and what I'm showing you on this slide is the expected path of our number for the aggregate economy, we call real GDP. And if you look on the left-hand side, these are numbers from North Carolina. Going into this pandemic, if you look at the far left-hand side, we had a GDP in North Carolina just shy of $580 billion. That's an annualized number. We did see slippage in that first quarter, February primarily, and then what we're expecting is the big drop to occur in the second quarter. You can see that we're expecting GDP in North Carolina to slip all the way from 570 billion actually that's the fourth quarter of 2019, down to just a little over 340 billion in the second quarter. That is a tremendous drop, but we are hoping and expecting that GDP will recover in the third quarter. You can see it bouncing up to 420, further recovery in the fourth quarter, 464, and then continue on. But notice that it will not be, and I don't know if these numbers show up on your slide, but that far right-hand slide number of 584.9 billion, that's for 2023. So based on these forecasts, and this is an average forecast of the forecasts that are out there, North Carolina will not be back to where it was pre-pandemic until 2023. That's an amazing time period. And I'm not the only economist to say this. And then if you look at the next slide, which shows you the expected, so next slide, please. Shows you the expected path of unemployment. You can see we went into this pandemic, we'll look at the left side of the slide, 3.8% unemployment rate. That is fantastic. That is an amazingly low unemployment rate. Up to about 14% in the second quarter, we think is the peak. We've already passed that peak, and then you can see going down. Now we're actually better. If you look at this slide, I was predicting 9.6 for the fourth quarter. We're now at 7.6. But of course, things may slow down. We may retreat on this. But anyway, the point here is you do see an expected slow decline in unemployment throughout the next several years. And again, if you look at the far right-hand side, based on these forecasts, will still be in 2023 5.4% higher than the 3.8. So I think the takeaway from both these slides is the effects of this pandemic is going to be with us for a while, that the aggregate economic numbers will improve, but we're not going to snap back as some have hoped and be back normal, if you will, next year. It's going to take several years. Next slide. Now, I want to conclude by talking about some long run impacts. And most people right now think that this pandemic is going to cause some dramatic structural changes in our economy. In fact, one economist, and I wish I remembered his name, said that it's like we have fast forwarded to 2030. All of these trends that I'm going to talk about were in play. It's just that the pandemic has accelerated them. So hence the idea that it's like we're in 2030. The first one is one that we're working with right now, tele and everything. People are teleworking. People are going to do remote learning in school. My students, half my students are going to do that. Half the students at NC State. Telemedicine, et cetera. My wife had an incident after the pandemic started. She got it all dealt with by communicating with our doctor over the computer. Let me focus on the work one. I think that's the most interesting. Going into this pandemic, about 8% of people worked from home, remotely from home. We think it's probably as high right now as somewhere between 15 and 20%. And there are some experts who think it will go as high as 33% in the next couple of years. 1 out of 3 workers working from home. That is a major game changer. That allows people to live virtually wherever they want to live. That cuts down on commuting. It may help some families with that very important work-home balance, especially if they've had children. That is a big, big game changer. So that's something to watch. Obviously with school, we're having a debate about that, especially in K through 12. Can remote learning substitute for in-person learning? My wife is a retired school teacher from elementary school. She's weighed in on this, said no. But hopefully that can be worked out. And then telemedicine, that's been something that many thought was coming. So this is, I think, going to be the biggest trend to watch. Number 2, globalization. I think we are going to reevaluate globalization, particularly with China. Some say, most say, I guess, the virus came from China. Many of our companies here who have supply chains to China have been very much hurt by this. And then I think there's a situation we don't want to be reliant upon other countries for a lot of medical supplies, which we have been. So I think you're going to see some supply chain and globalization impacts there. That actually covers points 2 and 3. And then the last one, and I just read an article today on this in the Wall Street Journal this morning, very interesting idea that will this pandemic and its aftermath actually retard the growth of cities? Cities have enjoyed a big revival, especially big cities, in the 21st century. Technology companies were located there. Young people wanted to live in the cities, the excitement, the amenities, et cetera. There are some saying that, wait a minute, the pandemics generally have been worse in dense cities. This could cause people, especially families, to say, I don't want to live in cities. I want to live out where I've got some space, not necessarily out on a farm, but maybe in a suburb, maybe in a small town, et cetera. So that's going to be a very, very interesting trend to watch. Will we see big cities? Now, I don't think Charlotte and Raleigh will necessarily be in this case, but especially in the Northeast corridor, maybe in California, will we see some of those big major metropolitan areas really take a hit and people move out of the inner city and increasingly go to the suburbs and to rural areas? Now, this could be a big boom for rural areas, particularly North Carolina. I think to really cement this, we would need reliable high-speed internet in rural areas, and obviously that's something that many have been pushing. Well, let me stop there and see if I guess we've got a couple of questions. If those can be funneled to me, I'd be happy to answer them. And I hope you all continue to be safe. And hopefully a year from now, we'll be looking back at this and saying, "Wow, what a year to live through!" But we made it, and we're moving ahead.
Can I ask a live question?
Yes, I'm here. Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Hey, Mike, I noticed before, actually in the last 2 months, I've seen more help wanted signs in all forms of retail establishments, certainly a lot more than pre-pandemic. Do you think that's just a function of people making more money not to work?
Yeah, there is an issue there, and let me just explain for other participants. When the federal government came in and said, we're going to give every unemployed person an extra $600 per week on top of what they get from the state, their state. For a state like North Carolina, which is, and you can judge whether it's good or bad, but we're really at the bottom in terms of paying unemployed workers. I think we have one of the lowest average unemployment compensation rates. With that $600 on top, what that meant is, particularly for people with low wages and minimum wages, they're making more being unemployed than employed. So there's a concern there that just based on incentives, this says nothing about the people, it's just an incentive. I would do the same thing. If I can make more money unemployed than employed, what's my motivation to go out and look for a job? This is going to come to a head at the end of this month, because again, if nothing else is done at the end of this month by Congress, that 600 is going to go away. My guess is if there is a re-upping of that help, it's going to be in a different form. It's not going to be a flat 600. It might be a number less than 600. It might be a percentage of what the state gives. But yeah, many have called attention to that. And again, this says nothing bad about people. It's just economists are trained to look at incentives. And there clearly is an incentive here in some situations, particularly people earning very low wages. If they can make more not working than working, then probably that's where they're going to go. So yeah, I think that's an incentive, that's an issue for shops and people. And I think also it may simply be that combine that with the fact people are still scared. People are still reluctant maybe to go out there. So yeah, this is going to be you're going to hear a lot about this in terms of the federal help over the next couple of weeks.
Mike, we do have another question. It says, let's see, Scott Corbin, it's, they were thinking that June 2021, once the moratorium, whoops, can you take over, Mary Rachel?
Sorry, I'm not seeing the chats.
I'm sorry, I'm back. Once the
I can
moratorium.
ask a question.
Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Dr. Walden, given that the moratorium on foreclosures is going to be lifted sometime, call it May, June of 2021, forbearances are going to expire. What are you anticipating the impact that's going to have on our local market? At what point will we begin to see the impact of that if those jobs are still not available?
Yeah. I think you're going to have a lot of bankruptcies. I think you're going to have a lot of financial angst there. And yeah, I think I'm worried about that. I'm worried about the landlords who, and rents, and when that expires, and I'm not sure when that expires, landlords not getting paid. Yeah, I think there's some unintended consequences of what was done, I think, very, very quickly. And I understand the motivation, but maybe not with a great deal of thought to the consequences down the road. There might be something, this is something else to watch in the next bill that comes out of Washington, if there is a bill, to see if there's anything in there from the federal level that addresses this. But yeah, I do worry that we're going to have some financial situations to deal with when these various moratoriums and restrictions, et cetera, expire.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all very, very much. Thank you for what you do. Good luck. I know that's a cheap thing to say, but I think luck is a lot of this. I didn't mention this, but one of the big issues here is this virus. We just don't know how it's going to go, so we're in a very, very, to say it mildly, an uncertain time. Thank you very much. Look to see you on the other end where I can see you all in person.
Before you go, Dr. Walden, we have one more question that popped up.
Yes.
And it says, what about the rumors about large job layoffs are coming through from corporate America and the middle class? And I think this is relative to seeing what happens in October when some of the provisions from the PPP are rolled back and so forth about employment.
Yeah, I think the concerns there were reflected in those unemployment number forecasts, and that is that we are not going to snap back, particularly in the labor market. It's going to be a different labor market out there. A lot of industries, particularly in, for example, you mentioned travel, airlines, they're likely not going to get back anywhere near normal for a long period of time. So you're going to have layoffs there. A lot of those layoffs could very well be in middle class incomes, but also a lot in lower paying jobs, particularly jobs where businesses are motivated to try to substitute technology and machinery for people. I'll just leave you with this. I was very amazed to see, because I actually predicted this, but I didn't think it would come so fast. The meat processing plants, very important in North Carolina, very important for those who like to eat meat. They've been hit by the virus and shutdowns, et cetera. I saw a report last week that, and I'm not sure where it was in the country, I don't think it was in North Carolina, they are now being introduced in these plants, robots to do the work of people. And I actually predicted this when this all started, that that's going to be a motivation of businesses, because people are now workers can be looked at as a liability because they can get sick, they can be ordered to stay home, et cetera. So I think we're going to see, again, that acceleration of the introduction of advanced technology and machines to take the place of people. And so I think that's another reason why we're not going to get the unemployment rate down as fast as we want. And this presents implications for my sector, education. We're going to have a big job, I think, of doing a lot of retraining of people, and we need to do it fast, and we need to do it inexpensively, or else we're going to have a lot of people out there afloat without a paddle due to the changes in the economy, and particularly the labor market.
Well, thank you, Dr. Walden. As always, it's a pleasure to hear from you. I think it's always informative, and we always look forward to having you here. So
thank you very much. Thank you.
Stacey.
Yeah, so I'm excited. Thanks for the robots, Mike. That was a good visual for the future, because we can see real estate, everybody driving around in their Tesla without the driver, and then the robot brings them into the house. And boy, talk about Zoom meetings will look great then versus interacting with robots. All right, residential. I'm sure you all have heard a whole bunch of things about letters in the economy, V shapes, Nike swoosh shape. And I didn't get that until I saw Mike's graph. That actually looked like a Nike swoosh to me. And then you got like somebody's EKG going up and down. So it's odd. That I think what's been interesting to me about this is that everybody's kind of at the same level of what's going to happen. And that is, they don't know. I think in the Great Recession, economists kind of knew, Wall Street kind of knew, finance players kind of knew, but this one, we're all guessing on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down into 3 periods of time. I'm going to look at the first 6 months of the year, which is what you see on the screen now. And I'm going to look at June versus prior Junes. And then I'm going to look at second quarter versus prior second quarters. And the news will get worse as I go through. So I'm going to hit you with the good news first. Showings by month, if you look at the middle there, well, there's April. That was really the heart of the stay-at-home orders, way down. So that's a V. I mean, and January and February were phenomenal from how the market came out of the gate, and most everybody I've talked to was feeling that. And boy, if we had not had this, where would we be from a housing standpoint? But we are where we are. So from a showing standpoint, you see a nice little V there. It bottomed out. That's good. May and June, it came back up. June was the highest number of showings in the year. Really what this did was kind of take a month off, because this graph is usually about 1 to 2 months prior. You usually get peak showings in March and April. Now we got them in May and June. June showings were up 7% versus May. Houses listed during the month, this is going to be a continuing issue. This is really the one thing that I think that is very problematic, especially for those of you who are exclusively resales. Because if your inventory of potential things that you have to list keeps going down at significant numbers, that's going to be a real challenge for y'all. Houses listed during the month, once again, a continuing theme. April seems to be the bottom of it. Don't really know why there were so many listed in March. Maybe they thought they could sell them, or they didn't think the pandemic was going to have as big of an influence as it did. But March is typically February, March are typically the 2 biggest months of the year in terms of new listings coming on the market. So we did see that. And then all of a sudden, and essentially those March numbers were front loaded during the first 2 weeks. I think during the what I say, what really hit people, especially the basketball lovers, is when they canceled the ACC tournament, and then everybody said, "Oh wow, this is for real." Don't know if that's really what happened in the market, but that's kind of my one of my opinions of that. So good news is that we bounced back in May and June, about 3,500 new listings on the market in June. That's the second highest during the year. Now, pending listings, I think we're almost getting to the point where we have this virtual inventory. I'm almost gonna, if you've read my reports or heard me speak, I do look at this point in time inventory metric. But as this year has gone on and the market is behaving as it is, it's almost a meaningless metric because it keeps going down at significant numbers, and yet the pending listings keep going up. So I think it kind of confuses people, saying, how can you have inventory go down and pending listings go up? Well, pending listings got hit in March and April, but boy, they sure bounced back in May and June. Look at that, about 3,800 in May and 3,900, 3,962 in June. So pending listings were up 4%. And then you go up in pending listings, you're going to get a good bump in closed listings. So closed listings June versus May up 31%. And typically June is the highest. June and July are the two highest months of the year in terms of where we are for closed listings. So, you know, perspective is always key with these things because you can throw out numbers and you got to know where these numbers, how these numbers relate. And sometimes we get people in the media that like to see a big giant percentage number and use that, and they don't put it in context. So that's why you're getting in three different areas. June showings, this goes all the way back to 2016, this top graph here. We're up 11% versus June of last year. So that's actually very good. And it is this, it's the third highest June in this period that you see. We get down to June houses listed. This is not very good, down 3% compared to where we were a year ago. But look at how many houses were coming on the market in 2016 and 2017. The interesting thing is, and I really, this is the one area of data that I'd love to get my hands on in terms of, I really want to know why buyers bought house in the first quarter of the year, because they did, the real estate industry had consumption that was not observed in a lot of other markets and entities. It's just, you know, a lot of businesses closed down, and not only did real estate not close down, but it really performed at levels that were significant, showed significant activity. So it is, I've asked that question. There's a bunch of answers out there. I'm not sure it's just one thing, but it is interesting. Typically, if you look at things from a supply and demand standpoint, and you have shown demand, and you have also exhibited that there is not enough supply to meet demand, in theory, the market should react to supply that. Now, new homes can supply additional inventory, but resales can't. So in theory, especially with house prices going up, you do get, it is kind of a head scratcher that there is a demand for resale listing, and you have this great interest rate environment. And in many cases, people's houses can be sold in a week or two. So it is probably the least friction of an environment that you've ever had, or the most liquid that your house has ever been. And yet we still can't get houses to come on the market to meet where demand is. So it's one of those things that really was a big second quarter issue, and will continue to be a third and fourth quarter issue, because I'm not sure I see anything out there that's going to change. So here's pending listings going through June. It was the best June on record. 3,962 is up 15% compared to June listings of a year ago. So that's really good. And then you scroll down to monthly closed sales. June closed sales were up 3%, and they, you know, 3,491. That's pretty much close to the average if you look at 2016 and 2017. So that's good for that. Now we get into second quarter is not going to be good, because the first part of the second quarter was not good. Just like the first quarter, the first 2 months were great. It was really the pandemic didn't, you know, us, you know, people like to analyze markets, and economists like things in like quarters and months. They don't like it when they bleed into other quarters. But the pandemic essentially started at the end of the first quarter and bled into the first 2 months of the second quarter. So it really makes trying to peg exactly what happened, you know, its influence on the market more challenging than it should be. Once again, here's the showings number, but this is directly related. This is not due to lower demand. This is due to lower supply. And you look at about 190,000 showings, second quarter of this year, all the way up to 275,000 showings in the second quarter of 2016. So 2Q this year versus 2Q last year was down 11%. Houses listed during the quarter, this is a pretty graphic graph. If you look at houses listed down 16%. And I guess if you were in Dr. Walden's class and he put this slide up there and it said, okay, here's what happened to inventory, what's going to happen to closings, you would say that it would shrink that much, but it didn't. Matter of fact, it increased. So it's one of those things that you talk about when a house gets listed. So when I count houses, it's during a given point in time. Usually it's a 30-day period. But there's a lot of times within that 30-day period that the house comes on the market, is shown, comes under contract, and closes. And so that's where you see that imbalance between supply and demand coming out there. Second, here we go to the pending listings. Actually, almost caught up. If we didn't have the first month of the quarter, I think we would have blown this out. But we did about 10,426 pending listings during 2Q of this year, and last year was 10,496. So it was only down 1%, but it was the second highest second quarter in history. And I don't know there's many businesses out there that have said they had to the good, not to the bad, that said that they had the second highest of anything in their business. So I know this may come off as sucking up to the audience, but as I've said, a couple of these Zoom meetings that I've done, I think it's phenomenal that y'all have been able to take something that was not planned for and use technology. And not, if you looked at the learning curve, I'm sure there was a learning curve, but nobody talked about Zoom in the fourth quarter. Nobody talked about Zoom. The only time they talked about Zoom in January, February is the market zooming upwards. And now all of a sudden it's this thing that you had to use. And I think it's just amazing and phenomenal that y'all were able to adapt, first off from a showing standpoint, because when the government came down and said, it put challenges, especially in Orange and Durham County. And then you had to learn how to do virtual showings, and then you had to learn how to do virtual closings, and you had to learn a lot of different skill sets in like a 1 or 2 month period. And to still produce closing numbers that were done was just pretty amazing. So second to last slide, we look at this last graph here on this page. The total closed listings is in blue. The resale closed listings is in red. Total closed listings down 9, resale closed listings down 12. Well, that does make sense. But once again, the question that everybody has is when everything opened up and the economy started going again, we saw all the economic metrics improve, specifically towards employment. But now as test cases start to rise, how are they going to react? Are we going to react? Is the government going to make us react? Are we going to react voluntarily? Will people have the same passion for housing in the third and fourth quarter as they had in the first and second quarter? I don't think that interest rates are going to be higher. Matter of fact, interest rates, a lot of people say, should be lower than they are right now. So the closing numbers are absolutely reflective of what happened with pending listings and showing during the first and second quarter. The one thing that has really been beneficial to the market is what has happened to interest rates. This top graph, what I do is I take the average sales price during a month and I apply the average fixed mortgage rate. So if you look sheet down to the bottom here, it says the overall average sales price is up 3% and the resale sales price is up 2%. Actually, if you look at that payment, last year it was $1,580. This year it's $1,503. So this theoretical principal and interest payment that I have on a house prices went up 3%, yet the cost of that house from a principal and interest standpoint went down $77. So effectively, house prices are not even being influenced by the market. They're really looking at it more, and congrats to corporate America, because instead of teaching us how much debt we're getting into, they get us focusing on how much our monthly payment is. And so that's how we react economically. So if our monthly payment goes down from $1,580 to $1,503, we're okay with that, even if we had to borrow more money to get to that. So interesting thing. So for the most part, a lot of things to summarize, April was kind of the worst month for in terms of the influence of the pandemic and showings. Houses listed and pendings, but as we came out of April, we've gone up each month. Now, will that happen into the late summer and fall and winter? Not a single person out there knows what's going to happen. And the only thing I would say is that we have low interest rates are projected to continue. And we've got a pretty, if you go back to the Great Recession, the ability of people who got laid off to figure out something else to do was really what carried us through. And I think that's the same thing that's going to happen now. I noticed that American Airlines had furloughs and layoffs and stuff like that. The white collar workers have a really, and obviously that's tied to education, they have the ability to get jobs after they've been let go from another job or to create a company. It's more troubling for the blue collar. And so when you get the meat processing plants turning to robots, or you get, it could be fast food. You could be getting robots at fast foods more than you are now. So those are kind of the things looking forward, that this market may have a leg up on maybe the urban markets, or maybe the Atlanta or the Orlandos, or some of the other Sunbelt markets that we're compared to. So that's all I got.
So Stacey, we have a question coming out of the audience that says, talk about the above $1 million market and your thoughts for the rest of 2020.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know government makes tough decisions, but when you tell somebody that they're lawfully opening a business and they have to shut, so I'm speaking specifically to people that own gyms and health clubs and bars, and a lot of them are owned by people that, either own chains or they own 4 or 5 of them, and they've done really, really, really well. And they've been part of that $1 million plus market. That's the American dream. They came up as a bartender or a weightlifter, and they own their own gym, and they've done really good. And now, and when your revenue goes from whatever it is to zero, it doesn't take long for somebody living in a 7 million, a 7-figure house, their lifestyle, to burn through their savings. So I actually think that there could be some, I think there could be a little bit more pain there than we've seen in others. I don't think there's going to be pain in the lower ones, because in the lower price points, because we have so many people looking for housing that they'll just drop down and pick those up. The middle of the price range, I think, once again, going back to talking about people that getting laid off have the ability to either get a job or create another job. But I think these people who've invested everything in their businesses, and these businesses have been shut down. I also think that when corporate America starts looking at headcount, the ones that they're looking at are the ones that are making 6 figures. And especially if you're in that 50 to 60 plus range, you're easy to kind of chop out. And I think those are the people that are in 7-figure houses. So I don't know that we're going to see the pain on it with, in the third quarter, but I do think that if we see it, it'll be in the fourth quarter and the first quarter of next year, because I think that's when I think the economics of their households take longer to fall apart than the economics of a entry-level worker. I mean, you get laid off from your job, that's essentially it. You got to go find something else to do or get benefits to handle it. But when you're in a 7-figure house and you've got a 6-figure, 7-figure salary, boy, you got, private schools, you got 3 or 4 cars, you got boats, you got all that stuff takes a while to ratchet out. And I think holding on to the house is the one thing they want to hold on to. And I think they'll go through all those steps to shed their assets so that they can keep the house. So therefore, that's why I'm thinking it's going to be later in this year and the beginning of next year versus in the next couple of months.
Well, super. That looks like all the questions that have been brought forth.
Well, we did have one from Rachel. She said that a third, she read or heard somewhere, the third of all U.S. homeowners are delinquent on 1 or more mortgage payments. Do you believe that could be true in the Triangle area? And could that mean that there will be massive foreclosures in the future?
Well, It depends. I don't know. Somebody's got that data out there. If it's housing price below 300,000, this may sound cold, but the market would welcome that. The market needs that inventory. If it's housing price between 400 and 800,000, that's kind of where I see soft spots. Not everywhere, but in certain areas. I think when those come on the market, that would be problematic. And certainly if it's you know, I don't know what the historic delinquency rate of people that have $1 million plus houses, I think is not very high. So I don't think it'd have any influence on them. But I would say that the entry level and the middle price point, kind of going back to the Great Recession where people got in over their heads with their houses and they were buying $600,000 houses and they should have been buying $300,000 housing. I think those are going to be the ones, if that metric is true and those people are not able to catch up on their mortgage, then I think that's not going to be good for the market, because we do have enough inventory between 4 and 8, especially when you know 6 to 8 and things like that. But you know, below 300,000, if we get a bunch of foreclosures, there are plenty of buyers out there for them.
We have another question that says most distressed homeowners could sell at a profit now, but where will they go? There is nowhere to rent, meaning,
Yeah. I'm
assuming meaning rental single family dwellings. There are a ton of apartments out and continue to be built. So your thoughts?
Yeah, and you know, I think that's the biggest, when I kind of poll my audience and I see, you know, why aren't people putting their house on the market? Mostly because they don't like the alternatives that are there. They're too expensive. The lots are not what they had. There's a whole bunch of reasons why they're not doing it. But the other thing is that if you look at these apartment complexes that are being built now with, I guess, you know, $1,200 a month rent gets you a basic apartment, but you talk about $1,500 to $2,000, there's a significant amount of this of the homeowning population right now that has a mortgage payment below $1,000.
Right.
I'm one of them. So, thankfully, that's a big deal. I mean, okay, you know, if I got to sell my house and then go pay double my mortgage payment to go rent someplace, and I don't really like the alternatives, whether it's a house or an apartment. So I think you might have a lot more fight this time in people to hang on to their house versus in the recession, where I think people felt that they got screwed by the lenders and they paid too much for the house, so it was easier for them to just give the keys back and walk away. I don't think that's the case now with the majority of homeowners.
Okay. Doesn't look like any additional chat comments or questions.
We put them all to sleep. How about that? You get an economist and me back to back, guaranteed to knock them out.
Well, Stacey, thank you as always for the information. It's always helpful to see what's going on in our marketplace.
My
We
pleasure.
appreciate you doing what you do for our organization.
Yes, sir.
Thanks everybody for being here. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you. Thanks, Stacey.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Stacey.
Tell your
Bye.
husband I said, hey.
I'll do it.
Bye-bye.